Combining the best of daily fantasy and survivor pools, Stat Hero is the next chapter in fantasy sports. No more competing with the sharks or experts ever, because your only competition is Stat Hero itself. The face of DFS has changed. Finally, a game designed for the rest of us.
Hey, what's going on? Jeff Ratcliffe here. Welcome to Week 14. It's very likely the start of your fantasy football playoffs. The rubber has officially met the road. And of course, like we do every week, let's break down some stats that you need to know here for Week 14 fantasy football. And this week, what I did is I just looked back over the last month to see if we could spot some interesting trends for you. And there are interesting trends indeed. Let's start with Deshaun Watson, who last week certainly surprised some folks with his big performance against the New England Patriots. And this week, well, maybe a tough matchup against Denver. But so far, what have we seen over the last month from Deshaun Watson? He pushes the ball downfield, leads all quarterbacks with an average depth of target of 10.5. That means on average, he's throwing 10.5 yards downfield from the line of scrimmage. That's very far downfield, and that means big play upside. And I mentioned that Denver matchup. Well, maybe it isn't as bad as we thought. Over the last 4 weeks, they're actually the number 10 matchup for quarterbacks. So while they were tougher early on in the season, don't overthink Watson this week. Get him in your lineup. It's not a bad matchup after all. Let's talk about DeVante Parker with our next stat. Over the last month, only 5 non-quarterbacks have outscored DeVante Parker for fantasy purposes. Obviously, he was a monster last week against Philly, but he had already been breaking out before that point. If we look over this last month, 25 catches, 454 yards, and those 2 touchdowns he scored last week. DeVante Parker, finally a breakout player, and he is a back-end wide receiver 1 play with the fantasy football playoff starting. It's crazy, but it is absolutely true. Last year, in Week 16, the biggest letdown of the fantasy football season could possibly have been Todd Gurley not playing in that game. He looked like he was going to steamroll teams to a fantasy championship, and then we had to see C.J. Anderson out there in Week 16. Well, believe it or not, even though Todd Gurley has been a bit of a disappointment this year, he's actually been pretty good over the last month. He's starting to generate momentum. He's the number 12 fantasy running back over the span. Not elite, but he is seeing a lot of work in the red zone. In fact, 3rd over the last month in red zone carries with 12 of them. Todd Gurley with a little momentum here. As unlikely as that is, he could be a fantasy factor here in the playoffs for a lot of teams. Let's talk about Baker Mayfield, another guy who's had a disappointing season, no doubt about it, one of the most hyped up players for fantasy purposes, and it really just wasn't working. But if you look at Baker's schedule, he has a couple nice matchups here this week and next week, and what I really like about Baker Mayfield, over the last month, no quarterback has thrown to the end zone more than Mayfield. 14 end zone throws over that span of time. That's a big time number right there. The easiest way to score a touchdown, throw for a touchdown pass as a quarterback is to throw to the end zone. Baker doing that a lot. He has the Bengals this week. He has the Cardinals next week. Baker is a streamer with the fantasy playoffs kicking off. Finally, let's talk about DJ Moore. Hey, Carolina, well, the head coach is out. And really the writing was on the wall for this for a little while here with Ron Rivera, but you wouldn't really know it if you looked at DJ Moore's stats alone. Not that you would do that, but he has been awesome. Over the last month, he leads all wideouts in targets, 48 targets, so he's averaging a dozen a game over the last month. That's big time right there. He's producing like crazy as well, the number 3 fantasy receiver over that span. And he has another good matchup this week. DJ Moore, we pegged him as a breakout in the preseason. It really didn't happen until November, but he, like DeVante Parker, is also breaking out when it matters for fantasy purposes. If you have DJ Moore, you have to love him as a wide receiver 1 play this week, a top 10 option. Where does he come in my rankings? Well, we have those at PFF. We have projections. We have all kinds of matchup information, along with gambling, football stats in general, NFL mock drafts, all of that and more you can get over at PFF.com.
Thanks for watching the PFF YouTube channel. And if you want to subscribe, all you have to do is push the button. Don't forget everything you get. A little fantasy, push the button. A little green line for the gambling aspects of the game, push the button. College football, push the button. The YouTube channel from PFF.